Okay.
Hello. Are we live?
Hello.
My name is Bret. This is Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hi, my name is Matt. This is Bret.
We're on the opposite sides of North America. We're spanning the continent, and yet acting like we're in the same room. We actually have the same colors in our background. Like you have blue.
We are, except I'm always yellow. I
Yellow.
like to have to pull more yellow out, and I'm still yellow.
Maybe we should just go
When
black
you
and
are.
white,
Maybe.
and then no one will notice. That's next week. So we're here for you. This is the Q&A show. Once a month, we do a cloud native Q&A. It's what I'm calling it. I don't know what to call it. Well, I mean, simply calling it. There we go. Perfect. I'm traveling back in time. We were just talking about time travel. Matt is actually from 150 years ago when they did not have color cameras. And I am time traveling with him in this wonderful technology. But anyway, this show, we're here to answer your questions and have conversations around anything cloud native, cloud, Docker, DevOps, Kubernetes, security, supply chain. What else? What else can we talk about? There was actually, we didn't really come up with a lot we were going to specifically like talk about this week, but I do want to get through a few announcements. This show turns into a podcast. Not this show, not this particular episode, but our guests. Whenever we have guests on, which is usually every other week. So come back on Thursdays. We do a show every other week with a guest. They usually teach us stuff. They're showing us a tool. They're teaching us about a new product or a new feature in something. And we put it into a podcast. So you can see we just released episodes on Podman. It was on earlier this year. Falco, which is one of my favorite security tools for servers. DevPod, which was a new product from the Loft group, which is something on my computer now because it's probably the easiest way I know of to create a dev machine in the cloud or locally, and bring up my, it does more than Docker Compose. It's like Docker Compose on steroids, where it actually provisions the VM, where Compose just cares about containers. So it will provision the VM, provision the cloud, EC2 instance, DigitalOcean, whatever. Wherever you're at, it'll provision that VM. It'll even shut those VMs down when you're not using them to save you cost. So they call it like the open source code spaces, which is the GitHub servers that you get, essentially, private server. So that's pretty fun. DevOps for DevPod for dev containers. That was an episode came out last month. Man, that seemed like it was last week, but that was last month. We had a Docker show. So if you didn't know about the podcast, the link is below. I'm going to throw it in the chat. Put that in your podcast player. Hello, everyone. That's a Q. Venkatesh. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Martin. All the regulars are here. So we had the show. What else we got to talk about? Next month, if you didn't know, I'm now doing live courses. Matt sadly won't be there, but I'm doing courses on Maven. These are live-only courses. The next one is this July, so that would be 3 weeks from now. On the 10th, we start this course, which is a 1-2 combo punch. I feel like I need a punch sound. I have lots of sounds here. That's not a punch sound.
No.
And this is a course that is cheaper than consulting, but way more expensive than Udemy. So this is something you need to be serious about. You need to just, this is designed to help you implement these tools right then and there, not something you're going to buy and then in 6 months watch the videos and then get around to it. Like that's what we all do with Udemy, right? Like, I don't know. Have you bought Udemy courses, Matt? Are you a Udemy guy?
I have.
Okay.
It always came free with. I mean, I mostly used it when it was like a free benefit of working at Datadog.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Udemy Business, or UB as us insiders call it, UB. Yeah, that's a pretty great program.
It is.
Just because as an employee, you get thousands of courses, and you could choose from like 30 different Docker courses or something like that.
And it was pretty open to like everything that Udemy did. So I had some Kubernetes things, but I also had like passing your whatever section 143 something for drone pilots.
Oh yeah. Oh right. So that if you there's businesses that do drones. We have a actually pretty popular drone company here called DroneUp that is headquartered here in Virginia Beach. But yeah, I mean, there might even be meditation ones in there under the business subscription or whatever. Certainly stuff like on management, soft skills. There's a lot of soft skills stuff on there. I like Udemy Business more than Pluralsight because the challenge on Pluralsight, and this is maybe coming from the publisher side, because I have friends that publish on Pluralsight, and you have to ask Pluralsight, hey, do you want this topic? And if they already have it, they tend to decline you because they don't really want, to be fair, I guess to have a course on Pluralsight is awesome because you won't have a lot of competition. Whereas my Docker Mastery course has, I think there's 200 to 300 courses on Docker now.
Hmm.
And I would say there's all of the best ones. I don't know how many that is, or I know there's definitely 2 or 3 of my main competing courses that are all in the Udemy Business. So the nice thing is on Udemy Business or the Udemy subscription plan, because there's the personal subscription plan you can get.
Oh, is there
And there's the
now?
yeah, and you get that same
Okay.
set as Udemy Business. I don't even know how much it's a month. I don't know what it is, 20, $30 a month. But you
Hmm.
get that same set. And the cool thing is if you get tired of listening to me, you can go over there and you can listen to someone else's Udemy course. And it's funny because we're talking about Udemy courses, but I'm showing Maven. Uh, uh, so if you're curious, all my courses are over here. So these 4 are the Udemy courses. And the nice thing is I don't think my Swarm course really has a competitor. I don't think my Docker for Node.js really has a
Hmm.
competitor. Um, but those are definitely not my most popular courses. Like Docker Mastery is by and far, it's like 80% of sales are that course.
Hmm.
Um, and this year, I added the live course. So if any of you are interested in live courses like this Maven one, I'd love some feedback. So if we go back over here, so this course, so these are courses that are somewhere between $500 and $800 typically, and you're spending all of the course with me in Zoom. So you get videos to watch before we get into Zoom. Then we all get into Zoom together. We do stuff together. We actually implement stuff together. We have Q&A. We have lots of Q&A back and forth, and then you get homework, and then you go away for a couple of days, and then you come back. And so we're really only together like an hour and a half every other day for a couple of weeks. So for those of you in chat, if you're curious about this style of learning, um, what do you want to learn? What would you pay, or what could your company pay? Because a lot of the students that I have in these courses, they're getting, they're getting it reimbursed by their company. And the idea here is that these are technologies that you're doing now. Like this is something that you need to do now. This is important, and I think that's the best way to learn. Like I don't know about you, Matt, but I don't learn very well when it's something I'm not going to use anytime soon. I find that I'm just not that interested in the
Yeah.
details. You know,
Yeah.
like teach me car repair for a gasoline engine when I have a Tesla. I'm not going to be highly motivated to figure how that thing. I'm going to be curious, but I've learned that
Yeah.
curiosity isn't enough. Um,
Right.
you need like a little bit of passion, a little bit of intensity to learn. I mean, we all learn great in the moment where like the boss says, "Do this thing," and you don't know how to do it.
Yes.
So we're all
Yes.
really good at that.
Yes.
Um,
Just in time learning. Yeah.
that just-in-time learning. JITL is what I keep. A friend of mine, we were trying to come up with the acronym JITL, just-in-time learning.
Hmm. Sure.
So yeah, that's what this is about. This is the idea here is that we're going to do this once a quarter. Right now, this is the only topic, but we might add other ones based on feedback. And it's a JITL. It's designed to be a JITL. In fact, last time we had a whole team. We had 4, maybe 5 people from the same team all come at the same time. And then the goal was by the time we're done, you're implementing this in your real projects. You're not just
Right.
learning it in samples, although we do a lot of sample demo stuff. You're actually doing it on your real code. And then you get to come back to Zoom with the rest of us and get feedback on how did it work? Why did it not work? Your particular company problems with this. So I love this style of learning. In fact, I haven't taken a Maven course yet. But if you look at like, they've got AI. I keep watching the AI courses because like, and the crazy thing is these aren't people that just think, oh yeah, I can make a course on AI. This is a little bit how it's different from Udemy and Pluralsight. These aren't, particularly on Udemy, you have professional instructors, and they're just really, they might be teaching a topic that they just learned recently, and it might be a good course, but they are not the industry leading expert on that thing. This tends to be the people that made it, like ex Gugo, a fellow at Harvard, right? Like these are, AI creator, ex Google senior PM, TED speaker. So it's like these are the upper cream of the learning ladder. I'm trying to think of an analogy.
Are you saying you're the upper
Metaphors.
cream of the Docker world, or
I
of the
try.
sorry the
Yes, I am.
GitHub's world. Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
not the GitHub
Just checking.
Actions, but
Yeah.
because there's lots of people that use GitHub Actions. So, but what it's a funny that you ask that. The reason that my course even exists is because after trying to help multiple companies, big and small, implement this stuff, I had a ton of learning from real world implementations.
Hmm.
Teams with 5 people and teams with dozens and dozens of people, all using these tools. So we needed, and one of them, they cared a lot about SSO and platform engineering, and then on the other one, they're like, there's 3 of us and we just care about learning. And then there was all these
Hmm.
in between companies. And so I learned really over the lockdown. I learned these tools during the COVID lockdown and made a bunch of notes, made a bunch of open source repos that everybody can get at github.com, my name, which I can't seem to spell. But if you go through here, I'll just throw this in chat, everyone. If you go in there, you can see a bunch of examples that are feeding these courses. So I have, like any course I have, chances are the demos and the examples and all that stuff's all open source. And then in these courses, I have like the GitHub Actions DevOps templates. I have GitHub Actions for Docker. There's a lot in here on GitHub Actions. And anyway, so that's my course. That's what I've been
So
doing
you,
lately.
you said that everybody, gathers and they talk about, how they try to implement whatever it is they talked about in the previous session, and maybe they came up with some challenges, and you talked about that. Any of those challenges that you're able to talk about here, or
Oh, sure.
are they all pretty confidential?
No, nothing's confidential. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, um, although I don't tend to sign NDAs. Um, I do try to respect the privacy of clients, so I
Sure.
do tend to generalize it. There's definitely a lot of learnings, and that's so like if you look through even some of the stuff on this page talks about that Argo CD, for example, has lots of ways to deploy it. In fact, it's one of those things where there's so many different designs for deploying it. That's part of the barrier is you don't know the right or best way for you to deploy it. So you could just write a one-line command, install it in your cluster for
Hmm.
Argo CD, but that might not be the best design for you. You might need a multi-cluster design. You might need a design where you put it in one cluster and it controls other clusters remotely. You might need one Argo per cluster. So that's one of the big things we talk about in the course is like how you can help decide which way you want to install it and or deploy it. And we have a bunch of sample repos. In fact, um, I ended up creating a mock company called Mostly DevOps. So this is like a fake organization that we use during the course to implement a lot. So in the course, you'll actually create up your own organization. You'll import a bunch of repos to basically simulate code and DevOps YAML and Kubernetes manifests, and then you will implement GitHub Actions and a lot of this other stuff in your own organization. And then I have this sort of the sample one that is the sort of the reference architecture, and we have repos on Argo CD, and then we have a bunch of YAML in there on the different parts of it and how it installs and different. So yeah, there's a lot to it, and that's why we spend a whole week on Argo CD, because I think the hardest part with Argo is architecting it, not just your installation, but also your YAML for your apps and how you architect that all so that it's as automated as possible without you having to redesign the whole architecture 6 months in because you realized it was kind of hokey or it required too much maintenance. I think one of the biggest mistakes with Argo is people implement it in a way that requires a lot of PRs to deploy code. And so our goal is always like you have your code PR and then you maybe have one PR more, and that's the only PR that's needed for deployment. And then everything else should be automated. That way you get like a code review and then you have a deployment review if you want it. And it might just be as easy. We even have this thing in here where we even create the PR. So the robots create it. It's only up to your team to approve it for deployment. And in fact, it's not in here, I don't think. No, it's over. here. So under here, you can see this is robots creating a update to a particular app. So this would be the app image, and its production is the name of the environment.
Right.
So it's showing you which environment is about to get what a kind of update, and that's all created. It says it's created by me, but it's actually created by a GitHub action, and you can see the change. And it's really, like a lot of times people, when they're deploying code, they're just really deploying a new image version, and so it's really a one-line change. It's changing the tag to a different tag, and so we automate that in the course so that you essentially your developers don't have a bunch of additional work. And because I think it's one of the biggest complaints we've all had about this world of Kubernetes and all that stuff is the developers seem to be saddled with a lot more responsibility now in a lot of ways, and that sucks, right? Like, we've already got so much work to do. Why are we having to do all this other stuff as well?
Right.
And who do we have on the show recently? Was it Brandon? I'm trying to think of who we had. We were talking about this sort of problem with DevOps didn't mean developers have to do ops. Newsflash, DevOps does not mean give ops to dev, at least in terms of the responsibility. I think what it really is to me is about allowing the two to align themselves and collaborate way more so that they can work together more efficiently. But I think a lot of people got the message wrong, and they've been saddled with, like, we can fire the ops now. We don't need them. Anyway,
no ops.
Conrad's back. Sorry to leave you hanging there, Conrad. Hello, Lee.
I see there's somebody, Victor from Nigeria. Fun fact, my dad partially grew up in Lagos in Nigeria.
Cool. Have you been there? Have you been back?
I have not. No.
Okay.
No. But he often had stories of, as a 10-year-old just wandering out of their house in Lagos, wandering downtown on his own, just to go to the local candy store and buy. So I think it's a very different world than Lagos today. Back when he was there.
Yeah.
In the 50s and I guess 50s and 60s. Yeah.
You could say that about a lot of countries.
A lot of places. Yeah. Yeah.
We have a question, actually. Our first question here. How do I create an IDP as project to showcase my SRE skills? I don't know what IDP is.
I assume it's not identity provider.
Vrash, I'm sorry, I'm going to use Vrash as your name. Apologies for that. What can you help define that question a little bit better? I'm not sure what IDP is, but to create a project as showcase my SRE skills. Internal developer platform. Okay. Well, anything. So first off, I wouldn't narrow it to just IDP, right? Like, really what we're asking is, like, what can I do in addition to a resume to prove that I know what I'm talking about, right? So that's a great question, because on this show we talk a lot about, if you don't have the experience, you definitely want certifications. That helps make up for experience or university or both. And then we were just showing off my GitHub. And I'm not exactly going for a job, so I don't necessarily, I'm not suggesting that mine is the optimum design for what you need. But think of GitHub as your resume. A lot of team managers that are looking for internal developers, operators, SRE, DevOps staff, build engineers, all those types of roles, they're going to probably look at your GitHub. They're certainly going to Google you. So once your resume gets you past HR, and hopefully that gets you to the hiring manager that will actually look at your stuff. That person is going to go look at your GitHub probably. They're going to Google you, look at your socials, maybe if they're public. Um, Definitely look at your GitHub or GitLab. I would argue that even if you're a fan of GitLab, you probably should have a public GitHub profile that you put effort into. So that means when I say effort, I mean your picture looks like this, like you have a picture. Step one, have a picture. Um, Show your smile, show that you're likable, that you're personable, because if you're going to work in these teams, you're going to have to collaborate with other people. So if you're a nameless, faceless person on the internet, you're not giving them the best vibe for I'm going to be easy to work with and helpful in my team. And one of the things we talk about here when we talk about getting jobs in tech, nowadays it's not so much how much you know, or how much your experience is, because I have 30 years of experience, but someone probably doesn't care about my first 20 years of experience, because none of that experience is what I do today. So,
Right.
I mean, I learned TCP/IP. I don't know when Matt learned that, but that was a long time ago. That was in the 90s.
I mean, I learned it when you still needed to install TCP/IP stacks onto Windows because it didn't come with it.
Yes,
It was like Beam and Whiteside or B&W or something. I think.
that's like a classic geeks nerd question. There is, what version of Windows first allowed TCP/IP? It was 3.11.
Because you had to get that. And then there was Spyglass, was it, or Spy something? Because the browser needed some sort of TCP/IP stack, so you had to find the TCP/IP stack first.
Yeah, you had to. Yeah, it wasn't. 3.11 was the one that you could actually install the TCP/IP driver. Like 3 came out, and if it had networking, it was probably like NetBEUI or NetBIOS only.
Right.
But then a lot of us, we all had NetWare, and then we had Unix, and Unix spoke IP, so we needed to add these other stacks. So we had to add the NetWare stack, or I call it changed your login screen, all that stuff as well.
Yeah.
I think that was a little bit more like 95 Windows NT 4 days, but
Yeah.
But yeah, it was like 3.11. I remember, because we were able to finally install TCP/IP as a stack. So yeah, you and I learned it a long time ago.
Yeah.
But that's a skill that we can relate, that you probably should know that really well. You should know networking really well. But if you look at your GitHub profile, if you were to sort of send me your GitHub profile and I go look at it, and if I don't see a bunch of repos on you showing off your skills, like show me how you design your Terraform, show me how do you know Ansible, do you know shell scripting, have you designed an architecture for your IDP and put it into GitHub, and importantly with solid readmes that imagine you've got to train your coworkers and teach them all about the IDP you design. So pick a tool, whatever tools you want to put into this platform, build them up, write great readmes, maybe even put videos in there. That'll show your speaking skills, your ability to communicate, and those are all super important in dev teams and DevOps teams, SRE teams. They all require constant collaboration and constant knowledge sharing. So one of the things I will often tell new freshers or new people straight out of university is it matters more how you communicate, share your knowledge, and how you learn than it does how much you currently know, in terms of like, I have experience on all the clouds. I don't expect you to have experience on all the clouds or even 2 clouds. Having experience on 1 cloud is enough. And I bet you if you've learned one, you can probably learn the other ones pretty quick. Same with development languages. If you've learned one and you can write pretty decently in one, and it can just be shell scripts even for DevOps and SRE stuff. SRE maybe is a little bit closer in some ways, and a lot of SRE roles, to a developer, because you're kind of expected to make systems tooling, so you do need to know a language or two. But DevOps, there's a lot of DevOps roles, like build engineers, stuff like that, that they maybe don't program full time. In fact,
Right.
I've been working with DevOps teams for decades, and even before we had the term DevOps. And scripting was, a lot of times people, their only skill was scripting. Like they weren't really full-fledged programmers. They came from the ops world or the sysadmin world or the help desk world and got into DevOps because they knew how to fit systems together. How do I connect this system to that system? SSH, shell scripts, How do I automate this thing with tools? And yeah, there's some programming maybe in there if you consider shell scripting programming. Um, but they weren't like a high-end Go programmer or like a Python fluent developer. And they had a DevOps job. So I would say make your GitHub awesome.
Yep.
I don't know if you have any different opinions there, Matt.
I think, I mean, that, and also making a record of all the things that you, I mean, for work, all the things that you've worked on. Some of the projects that you've done for work are not public, and so definitely making a record of what did you do on it. I mean, that's been a problem for me. I haven't done that, making a record of like all those things that I worked on, because maybe the fact that it was some product that doesn't exist, that doesn't really matter. It's okay. I had to learn this thing, and what did we do with it? And like, even for me, I also do a lot of videos work, but so many of the videos that I made, uh, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, I mean, they just don't exist on anywhere anymore, because the company I worked for at the time, which was called Capteris, and then got acquired by OpenText. They no longer want this person representing their products that left the company a decade ago.
Right.
And so having a record of what are the things that you did, so that so it also makes it easier when you have to build out that resume or CV, that just make a record of what you did. I
Yeah.
always forget to do that.
Yeah, I think there's a certain level of passion too, especially when you're new in your career.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably already excited about this work, and that's probably why you got into it. So you're excited about technology, you're excited about learning. And the best way to show that you are excited and that you have the passion, because any job, I would feel like, I mean, every job, we all have a very steep learning curve when we all start, and we all get that new job, and we're super excited, and there's a bunch of new tools we have to learn, new processes we don't know, and some things that are familiar, but a lot of things that aren't, and we all are ramping up very quickly. I don't care how long you've been in your career. For me, that's the same. Every new team I work with, it's like, okay, what? Oh, you're using these tools. Oh, you're using these kind of servers. Oh, you're on this cloud. Like, there's just a bunch that I have to learn. And when you're brand new to your career, that's an even steeper learning curve. So how do you show that you can handle it? Like, you can handle the learning, you can handle all this new stuff. Your GitHub profile, like that, to me, like, anymore, I would not. Back in the day, you and I would say blog. You share your knowledge on a blog. Share your knowledge on a blog. That's also important. But you can share all that knowledge in GitHub. You can make a blog on GitHub. You can put it in the READMEs of your repos. If I see someone that comes in for my team, and I'm looking at their resume, and I'm like, yeah, this is pretty good. They got some certifications. They've done some. Maybe they've done some things. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they've got 10 certifications and 0 experience. And then I'm going to search them on Google. And then in that first page will definitely be the GitHub link, assuming that it exists. And I'm going to go to their GitHub profile. And if I don't see it really fully filled out and them trying as if it's their resume, if I don't see that, I probably will put them at the bottom of the pile. They will certainly not compete with someone who has it all filled out and has a bunch of example. I have this idea for a shell script that automates my things, or I have built this Terraform because I'm tired of recreating my Kubernetes clusters from scratch. And they make all this stuff, and you can tell they're solving their own problems, right? Like they're interested in maybe they just have a little lab, online, or they have a Raspberry Pi in their closet, and so they might have some repos on that. And that to me means that they're learning, they're sharing their knowledge, which is super important nowadays. Honestly, it's one of the biggest things I miss about being this content creator guy is I don't get every day to work with a team of people making a product or making an engineering product. We make products, but they're videos. And I miss that because you learn. I didn't realize until I didn't work in a large team of developers how much you learn from everyone else around you every day.
Right.
And when you don't have all those people, you have to read. You have to do more on your own. You have to read more on your own. You have to read more books because I can't depend on that person. Matt and I talk sci-fi, and so I'm always learning about new books from Matt because he's way more read, I believe, in sci-fi than I am. I had certainly my favorite authors, but no, not at all. Okay.
No.
Well, we certainly have different authors that we have read. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
I feel like I learn about authors and stories from you in a way that I could even share that, oh,
Hmm.
well, I've heard this guy's good, or, I heard this book
Hmm.
was really good. And I didn't even read them. It was just you. So that same knowledge
Right.
happens, and you and I hang out before the show. We talk about what we learned this week, anything new. You taught me about my favorite browser that I now use, Arc. Like, there's all these things that happen just because we're learning from each other. And in a job, that happens way more. So
Yeah.
I need to see that. To me, that's where your GitHub should go. Is like, that should show me
Hmm.
that you want to share, you love helping others. Because I don't know about you, Matt. My very first job, it was helping others. Like, I was tech support,
Yeah.
and that was where the addiction started. It was the dopamine hit of fixing someone's mouse or fixing copy paste in Word for someone. Like, that was the exciting moment. Like, when I figured it out, and then I could walk away, and that was 30 years ago. So,
Yeah.
man, it sounds like a long time ago. All right. So for those of you in chat, what other questions do you have? That was a great question.
I'd say another, like, you mentioned it briefly, but another kind of meta skill that is super important regardless of what your career ends up being. I mean, anything. It's just being able to tell a better story about what you did. And you mentioned that briefly, but I mean, being able to communicate and tell a story about what happened and make it interesting is a skill that some people are just born with. I mean, um, yeah, and
Yeah.
think that the idea of having to learn how to tell stories is silly. But for most of us, I think it's a skill you have to learn, and um, yeah, telling a better story.
Yeah. In fact, often in meetings, so you have engineering meetings in a normal job that you are an engineer, and often it's not necessarily the best idea that wins. It's the person that has the opinion, and wants to talk about it, wants to share about it, and has done the work.
Hmm.
Because we're all so busy, we all can't know everything. We all can't know every tool or every framework or every plugin. And I was running an engineering team, and we'd have meetings, and when we had a problem, we'd bring it to the meeting. Someone would have an opinion, and if no one else really had an opinion, we're like, yeah, you know what you're talking about. Sound like you've thought about it, and let's do that. Like, you have an
Yeah.
opinion, let's do it. And to me, like, writing a blog where you're talking about the technology you're using, or making repos with the technologies that you prefer, that's like having an opinion. I actually I remember interviewing for a job where DevOps was kind of young, and this is maybe like 2013, 2014, and I was really into chatbots. I love the idea of chatbots. I was like, I want Slack. I want to do everything in Slack
Yeah.
rather than the shell. And I remember a team that I was about to consult with. They were essentially interviewing me, and they're like, "So you like chat ops? Tell us all about it. Tell us what your favorite tools are. Tell us how you use it." And I couldn't shut up about it. I mean, they probably had to just cut me off. And it wasn't. We didn't actually implement a lot of chat ops. We did a couple of things, but they were just really interested in what did I know? How could I share? What was my process for coming up with the reason why this thing was real? To me, it was like the beginning of the idea of how can we get more people, even not in the even non-engineers, how can we give them access to do things in automation that we didn't want to give them access to Jenkins. We didn't have GitHub Actions or any of these fancy
Right.
things. Now we had Jenkins. And how do we give them abilities to do things in Jenkins? Well, we don't want to give them Jenkins. That's kind of scary,
Hmm.
especially if they're like a project
Hmm.
manager or they're a sales manager or something like that. But they needed to get the stats on the staging system, or they needed to find the sales instance of the solution we were trying to sell. They needed to find the one for their customer, or whatever, or make sure that it's available or something like that. And so we needed to give them commands in Slack. And so they all lived in Slack. Why not give them chats there? So I was pitching them all these ideas. I'm not sure if that's the reason I got hired, but they did pick me. So I'm gonna argue that was maybe one of the good reasons. Yeah, I like it. Great topic. Ansaku's back with one. I have a good one. If I was a swarm engineer, a swarm enthusiast, where should I go for an awesome hangout on Discord? This is a great topic because I had it already on screen. I'm with you, Martin. So, hey, we have a Discord server. Matt and I were just in there yesterday hanging out in our High Fivers group, which is a monthly hangout for DevOps professionals. And you can find out more about that in Discord or on our website. You can actually go down here on my website and go to membership. Basically, you become a YouTube member here, and if you join the High Fivers, you could get to hang out in that monthly call. But we have another one now, which is run by this guy, Ansaku. Also, I believe that's your handle on Discord. And up here, okay, so on the top left, actually, you can't see my cursor. That's kind of lame. Oh, there you go. Now you can see it. So up here at the very top, we have an events list. So this is our Discord server. You go right here, devops.fan. Tons of people in here, 14,000. And you can see a list of what's going on and what's coming up. It's like a calendar for the chat system. And I love this because we're starting to create this little community right now. This is happening right now. It looks like us. Yeah. Okay. This is us. And then tomorrow, I've got a free GitHub Actions and GitOps Q&A. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up there. In fact, I can share this link. If anyone is watching, copy event link, and you're interested, go to this link for tomorrow. Actually, that's a link to the Discord event. Let me just click that and actually copy that one out. How about that? So I'll send you that one. But what Ansaku is really asking about is this one right here. On July 7th, the Swarm fans of our Swarm channel are running a little Swarm hangout. So we're going to do a thing in Discord we haven't done yet. It's actually called a stage. And so it's kind of like if you had to have a webinar review. I hate the word webinar. Webinars make me want to fall asleep. Boring. But we have this little thing, feature in Discord rather, called a stage. And essentially means that a ton of people can join, hundreds of people can join, and they raise their hand, and then we put them on stage. So you'll have a couple of presenters that are running the show, starting the conversation, and then as people have questions or they want to have a quick talk, or maybe they want to show screen, any of that stuff, they sort of raise hands. We elevate them out of the crowd into the stage, and it's a little bit more civilized than just a giant Zoom call. So that's happening next month. And the nice thing here is that for all of these, you can say share, or you can actually, if you click on it, you can say you're interested. I'm definitely interested in this one since I'm hosting it. And you can say add to calendar. So you can add these things to your calendar so you don't forget them. And this is kind of turning into our little, I don't know, event management or community management system. They've got a bunch of new features that we haven't even enabled. By the way, thanks to all of you moderators. We have a bunch of moderators in the Discord server now that are all sponsoring the server, and we're now at the highest level of Discord. We're at level 3. So that means a lot of things. It means we can have huge upload files, and we get all these fancy features, and we have high quality audio and video in all of the audio video channels. And we've got other stuff coming. Like there's stuff that we're not even using yet, so I've got to enable it and work with people on enabling it. And we've got some graphic features and stuff that we're going to turn on. More of these little things like stickers. We have custom stickers that are part of our upgraded level. This is Foxy. She's our mascot, and we're going to have more of those hopefully. So come hang out in Discord with us.
Wow.
Advertisement successful. Yeah, thanks, Martin. Martin's running the that's on Secure there, and he's hosting the Swarm fans group. It's great. It's great in the Swarm fans because we actually have one of the Swarm developers who now works at Docker in there, as well as lots of Docker Swarm fans that are still using it or wanting to get back into it because maybe they've had a bad go of Kubernetes and they want to try something else. Weirdly, we don't have a I forgot the name of the third orchestrator. Nomad. We don't have a Nomad channel. I'd love to be able to say we host channels and we have groups of supporters for all three orchestrators, all three open source orchestrators that are still, in my mind, used by a decent amount of people. I know there's a couple other ones out there. Matt showed me one earlier in the year created by the Hello guys.
I did?
I thought you did. Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah, you came in with a topic one time about the one created by the boot camp, not boot camp. That team that I can't remember that guy's name. It's not boot camp. Is it boot camp? Yeah, it's boot camp. The boot camp owners. They came up with their own orchestrator because they didn't need Kubernetes, and they made a new one. They thought it was simpler. Anyway, we talked about that earlier in the year. I don't know anyone that's using it. So I know people using Swarm. I know people using Nomad. I know people using Kubernetes. Right. So, and then there's a couple, like there's one that was created by Azure years ago. There's obviously ECS on AWS, but ECS doesn't really have an open source version you can run anywhere. So I don't really count that as a real option for most people.
Right.
So I'd love to have a Nomad in here, but I don't know that we have any Nomad fans. Maybe it's one of those create it and they will come kind of things. Yeah, BaseCamp. Not Bootcamp.
Oh, yeah. I do.
BaseCamp.
No, I do remember it. It was it had like, it was like a 4-letter name. And a cool video about it. And that's all I've seen.
BaseCamp. I'm looking for it now. Titles for ops, service orchestrator. I can't find it. Somebody in chat can help us out.
MRSK. Maersk.
Maersk.dev.
Yep.
Deploy apps from anywhere. Yeah, I keep saying the hey guy, but it's BaseCamp. Yeah, so their argument is same declarative model around imperative commands. So they went down the imperative rabbit hole, which okay. Most of us have left imperative, but all these things have cycles. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was a pushback on we don't like imperative suddenly for a list of reasons. Now let's all do imperative again. And to be fair, it's hard to have an opinion because I haven't actually tried it. So
yeah, there's
another thing that actually happened recently that I didn't put on here. That's actually happened yesterday. Adam Jacob of Chef fame created System Initiative. I don't know if anyone heard that news. It's a tool. It's a tool to help DevOps implementers. Like he and Kelsey Hightower did a Twitter space announcing it. And it's in JavaScript or TypeScript. It's language TypeScript-based infrastructure design, and evidently has collaboration. Like it's a visual diagram thingy, and you can do it with multiple people. Hence all the little different pointers in the screen. And I mean, sure. Like, let's see if it gets traction, and then I might try it. I tend to not try things until they get traction. So it's interesting to see if they'll. I'm not sure if this is the idea of like it's a private beta. So this makes me think, okay, this is a service, not an open source. Maybe there are open source components, but this is an interesting term. So we've been for a while now. The industry has tried to be coming up with what's the next buzzword. Everyone's worn out DevOps. I still think it has legs. I still think all these other things are just iterations of DevOps. Revolution is a great idea from Emily. What's her name? I forgot Emily's last name. When she did a GitHub universe keynote talk on the idea of something called Revolution, which would be the replacement or the all-encompassing, and it's DevOps and Agile and all modern concepts all brought together into a framework. There's some people that are trying to argue that platform engineering is the replacement for DevOps, which I completely disagree. They are completely different things. They are not related. You use DevOps to create a platform for your engineers, but I don't see how platform engineering can possibly replace DevOps. And then we have
Emily Freeman.
Emily Freeman. There you go. Yep.
Yeah.
And we've shown her video. I've talked about. I've shown her YouTube video. Yeah, rethinking the SDLC. And so she did multiple talks, but if I do it on YouTube, there we go. This is a fantastic video. Also really well done because high production value. But I'll put that in chat. That's a great one for what if unlike currently the word DevOps has been so overused and so inappropriately assigned to all sorts of things that don't really define DevOps well. The DevOps word has kind of lost meaning. So let's create something new that actually has a framework around it, and it starts with the framework that we can define so we can clearly understand, is it this or not? Whereas a lot of times DevOps, it seems like it's everything. Like everything has the word DevOps in it. It's lost all meaning. Surprisingly, the GitOps community has tried to avoid that, which is, I think, kind of awesome. Actually, that's OpenGit. I think it's OpenGitOps. So OpenGitOps is a consortium of companies that are all trying to create the GitOps principles. And I love this because you could really get confused about what GitOps is, especially as different vendors have taken a different tactic, even disagreeing with each other. So they're actually all bringing together and versioning these principles, these 4 principles that make up GitOps. And you have to have all 4 or you are not GitOps. And I love this. It's fine to have an opinion. It's fine to disagree. But when we're all talking, at least we can agree on something. And I love that we have these. We never really, in the early days of DevOps, got sort of hard checkbox yes or no. I have these things, thus I am doing DevOps. We never really got that. It was very nebulous. It was very process driven, monitoring, agile mindsets, and all this kind of stuff that really was just not. It didn't have teeth to it. And I think that GitOps is doing a much better job of that. So yeah, I love this idea that they mentioned of, what was this? Down here under System Initiative. He says second wave DevOps, which I have not heard of. Second wave DevOps. So DevOps 2.0. Maybe that was already taken. Maybe somebody's already tried that. But we have a lot of people trying to rehash DevOps. And I think really what the problem is it's not that DevOps is old or outdated. It's that we never really had a good definition. So these new ones are really trying to define it so that we know whether or not, we all have these stories that I went into a team, they said that they have a DevOps engineer, but he wasn't doing DevOps. Or, the DevOps team wasn't doing DevOps. All the DevOps people were just managing Jenkins. which doesn't mean they necessarily have a DevOps mindset. So yeah, you got it at the same time that Martin got it. Maersk.
Maersk.
Yeah, Brett Hinton saying you have many different frameworks to try and define DevOps, and not having one seemed to allow many to adjust to be whatever they wanted. Exactly. I think what we've learned is the minute that we get a phrase in the community of humans, what ends up happening pretty quickly is, if it's sticking, if we all like keep talking about it, like the GitOps one, which is probably to me one of the most recent examples, is that the companies immediately latch onto that and try to define it based on what their tool does. So if their tool doesn't do a thing, well, that's not a part of this because our tool does all of it. And the problem is we end up with tooling companies defining because if you think of all these things, they're very much human and process and culture concepts. Same thing's happening with platform engineering, which is not it's not a new thing. We just made a new word that is a concept of several old words. Self-service was one we were using in the 2000s for very similar concepts. And so a product company in particular, but a series of product companies are trying to redefine that word. And I feel like the community has no longer controls that word anymore, because there's now companies that are making these products that are running the conferences. So Platform Engineering Conf and stuff like that. And I think that just gets really dangerous, because now it's one company defining the ecosystem term. And so we get questions on this show. Is platform engineering replacing DevOps, or should I learn platform engineering?
Yeah.
And I don't. The answer is always no. SRE, I'm like, I would be interesting to talk about the origin of SRE. That really kind of came out of Google.
Yeah.
The nice thing is at least Google.
Yeah, because there was I mean, the first time I remember hearing that term was right around the time that the book came out. There was like a book about SRE from a few Google developers or Google employees.
Yeah.
And that's where it kind of like really got legs.
Yeah, so you could argue that it came out of Google, but the nice thing is, in that case, Google wasn't necessarily trying to sell you a product that had this new term in it.
Yeah.
They were like, this is the way we do business, and we're sharing our knowledge. Maybe you would like to do the same thing as well. So I feel like the industry picked up on it, ran with it. We now have at least, I mean, the SRE books that I think of like the Google's web-based SRE site, which is the one that I reference. But even though I guess it's still very much that Google thing when you think about those particular troves of knowledge, it still doesn't feel. It still feels like an industry thing. It still doesn't feel like, oh yeah, this SRE company is selling me an SRE product to do SRE. And that's the feeling that I started to get with GitOps, because we had a couple of companies that were competing, and then others jumped in and said, hey, let's make this an open GitOps thing. Let's create a site together. Let's try to create some consensus. That was great. I'm not sure if we've really gotten there with platform engineering yet, because that's probably the latest term, I feel like. But second, it'd be interesting to see if like this revolution. I hope Emily all the best. I wish that I love the revolution idea. I hope that sticks or gets more popular with more people outside of her peer group, and then what is it? Second day DevOps or second? I already forgot what it's called. Second wave DevOps. Second wave. Second wave.
They're gonna go around day 2.
It's too. You know what? It's already too long. I mean, who's gonna call it second wave DevOps? Like that? It's too long. Why not just second wave? How about we just call it second wave? The problem is does it have teeth? Can I tell whether or not someone is doing second wave DevOps? I need a checkoff list. I need a framework, like Brett's saying in chat. PALMs, people, process, technology. Yeah. I mean, to me, still to this day, like a lot of the Gene books, the GitHub, the DevOps Handbook, and a lot of those follow-on books, like to me, those
Phoenix.
are the troves that are. That's what helped me define what I knew DevOps was and wasn't.
Right.
And at some point, the technology companies all took hold of the word. So now, when I walk into a shop that needs help, often they're not really doing the people, the process, or the culture. They're just doing the technology, and it's like,
Right.
are you really? So I think I've learned that like if these things are going to stick, we need them to be a framework. I like that. I like that Bret established that framework word there. That's what we're missing, is a consistent framework that everyone agrees with. In fact, not to beat my own drum too much, but over on my site there is an article. Here's the challenge: can I find something on my website? This is not gonna find becoming. Yeah, like how many posts do I have on DevOps? So I have this thing which I have not turned into its own post. It's a part of this other one, and this may not even be the right post. I don't think it is. Sadly, no. Do I link to the other ones? Maybe this is it. Yes. So I actually created your own little evaluation. And what I've found on the industry is when it comes to DevOps, if you try to go look at like DevOps survey or DevOps evaluation or DevOps audit, or you try to figure out, are we doing all the right things, right? There are either every company that's trying to sell you a product in the DevOps space has a blog post that is the beginnings of this. It's very little effort they put in. They checked a box. They wrote an article. Here's the things you need to do, and it's too simplistic, right? It doesn't have enough meat in it, enough teeth. And then there's the opposite. If you go to like the DevOps Institute, you go to some other big DevOps learning and training, or some of these companies, they have these really in-depth frameworks that take you some serious time to get through. What I tried to do was balance the two, and I'll put this in chat. What is DevOps is the webpage. I have to remember that. So it goes through 3 different parts: culture, process, and tooling. And the idea is you get 1 to 5 points per question. There's 4 or 5 questions per part. And so you can either give it 0 points, 3 points, or 5 points. That's all you can do. So it's very narrow. It's very focused. And the idea is you add them all up, and then at the end you have a very simplistic number. The higher the number, it's a single number. The higher the number, the more likely that you are meeting all the original objectives of DevOps. So it actually has a little scoring at the bottom. It's one of those things where you hopefully can do this in an hour. Like if you know what your DevOps team is doing and their culture and all the tools and the processes that you have implemented, you can probably do all this in an hour. And this is honestly based on a decade of DevOps consulting, like working with not just implementing DevOps in teams around the world, but also working with companies as a subcontractor that they're a DevOps implementation company going to bigger companies. And so I would often I would augment others. So I tried to put all of this. This took me like a week to write. I'm not a great writer, so it's a very painful process. But yeah, if you had over 46 points in there, then your team is essentially DevOps masters. You are doing most, if not all, the things on this list. I tried to keep it so simple that you really didn't even necessarily. You could maybe just do it as a three images and a tweet, and then people could fill it in. In fact, I maybe need to tweet this out again because it's been a while. It's been a couple years since I wrote this. Anyway, that's what we're all looking for, I think, when I talk to teams and they're trying to figure out, we don't really know what to do. We don't really have a checklist. We just know we got this tool. We automated some things in a CI tool. We're using YAML and we're using Argo. Like, are we DevOps? And that was a constant challenge with teams on trying to figure out where to go next, right? Um, and quite honestly, a lot of times I would just ask one question. It's like, what sucks? What like I often like my first time with a team would be, all right, I don't know any of you, I don't know any of your processes, but just give me all the complaints. What sucks about your systems? What do you hate about your processes? What is a pain in your weekly work? And we would
Hmm.
always get 10 to 20 things, like this nice huge list, and it would be across the board. It would be everything. It would be the devs are constantly putting in tickets for new environments that we have to manually spin up. All right, that's a check off list. That's a process and tooling thing. Ops doesn't understand that we need we need them to help us do this thing more often, or we're constantly having to call them in the middle of the night for things or whatever. That's maybe a culture thing. I mean, so I would go by complaints, like and we would ask all the teams. I wouldn't even just ask the developer team. I'd ask like the dev team, the ops team, the DevOps team, the if we had security people or project managers, I would ask them too. And we'd sort of combine this huge list of themes of what everybody thinks sucks. Because the reality is DevOps is really just about optimization of people and process. And if you just listen to them, they usually know what's not great. Anyway, all right, people. Any more questions before we wrap this up? We're here for you in chat. I think while we're at it, should we talk about who's coming up?
Yeah.
Let me bring. So did I say we do this live every week, people? I think I said that. We're live every week. We have guests, different people on the show all the time. And if I go over here to our show notes, I'm just gonna bring this up on screen. It's way easier than me talking about it. Next week, we've got the founder and CEO of Solo.io to talk about Istio, Mesh, Envoy, Zero Trust Security, Cilium. Idits, I believe how you pronounce her name. I've met her once before, but that was like 2017, I think, at DockerCon. She was on stage at DockerCon doing a presentation. And then we have the course Q&A. Of course, every other week is a Q&A, and every other week is a guest. And then we have Josh Thurman from Ufizzy talking about ephemeral environments and essentially like preview environments, PR-based environment creation and deletion. That's what Ufizzy does. We're going to have them on showing off their tool. We're going to have Dan Garfield from CodeFresh, one of the more popular CIs out there as a platform. And one of the cool things is their CD, their automation for deployment, is entirely Argo CD, which is my favorite deployment tool. And they just took the whole company, doubled down on Argo CD. They're one of the main maintainers now of Argo CD as well. And they're all in. So it's kind of fun to see a CI company that's trying to create the CI/CD platform of the future, not just try to create their own way to deploy tools, but just to take a major open source tool, adopt it into their platform, use it in their platform, and then not just try to make money on it, but also give back a ton to the community. They've created multiple open source tools around Argo to help you with Argo. So I'm finally going to get Dan on the show. I met him years ago too, and weirdly never had him on the show. So we need to fix that. Also, Ken Collins, who's a local friend here in Virginia, a friend of mine. He's an AWS serverless hero. We're going to talk about Lambda. We're going to talk about containers in Lambda, all things containers and Lambda, mostly just Lambda. But he's also becoming a Docker fan, traditionally from a community that didn't adopt Docker up front. He's very much, I met him in the Ruby community. So the Ruby people, I would say, had their own systems, they had all these great tools out there, Heroku and whatnot, all of these things. They didn't always need containers. So I have a lot of Ruby friends that are still container holdouts today. So we're going to have Ken on to talk about Lambda. And then every other week is Q&A. And of course, that Q&A can be anything. Cloud native, Kubernetes, Docker, all things DevOps. All right. Cool. Blaziken. I'm not sure if that's how I say that. Blaziken? How about Kubernetes? I'm new to DevOps. Well, rewatch this show. We just spent the last hour and 10 minutes talking about Docker, Kubernetes, DevOps, and I would say go back. I have
Go
hundreds
back
of
to
videos now on this channel
yeah.
about Kubernetes.
Last week was great. Last week
Yeah,
with Brendan was great.
yeah. In
And
fact,
so many others.
that's a great point. I'm glad that someone here that remembers exactly what we did last week. So if you go after this show's over, go back in this channel to last week's show. We had one of the co-founders of the Kubernetes project on talking about the future containers, the basically what's the next thing after Kubernetes, or what's the next layer of abstraction on top of Kubernetes, which was, I thought, one of the best talks that we did there was just talking about how in 5 or 10 years might we all actually be consuming Kubernetes, and it might not be you talking to Kubernetes at all. It might be Kubernetes is really in the background, like we're starting to see a lot of ways in other platforms where they're running Kubernetes, but you have a different interface that's on top of it that's maybe a little simpler for those of us that don't need to create our own cloud, because that's kind of what Kubernetes was meant for. It was meant for operators to make a private cloud, and we don't all need that. So we talk about it. It's a great show. I'm super proud that we got to have him on. I was a little nervous and excited.
He's
all
just
at
a
the same
normal
time.
guy.
He's just a normal guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a normal guy, just a VP of Microsoft. But it was great because he spends so much time talking to customers, and I love that. Having someone who can see into enterprises, into big companies that are using the cloud, what their problems are. That's always fun to hear those stories. Yeah, you've heard about Docker and Kubernetes, but you're pretty sure there's more to learn. Absolutely. In fact, you can, if you're just joining this YouTube channel because you stumbled onto it, I'm not sure how you found us, but go here to our Discord server where people hang out every day talking about Docker and Kubernetes. So a free Discord server right there, devops.fan. Go do that. Of course, at the end of the show, we always get a bunch of questions, which is fine. Is there a way to test Docker files effectively? I mean, yeah, there are frameworks, bats, and similars, but is there a tool or such to test a Docker file? So I know, to me, there's two things. There's linting, and then there's just building. So there's plenty of linters out there. I'm a big fan of superlinter. Superlinter includes Hadulint, which is a Docker linter, probably the most popular one out there. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to go to the GitHub. So there we go. Hadulint is, I would say, the best one out there. There are multiple other ones out there. This one is the only one I stick with because the other ones either just repeat the same thing this one does and don't do as much, or they're outdated and they don't have a lot of the new functionality of Docker files. So I run that on every Docker file every time I make a commit. If I change the Docker file, the PR will automatically lint that file, even if I linted it locally. It will always lint it during GitHub Actions automation. And that's a part of my course that starts next month. So in case you weren't here at the beginning, I have a live course. You can find all of that links below in the description to this course. And we spent a whole week learning GitHub Actions for DevOps automation. We do things like linting. We do things like building of images automatically, testing of images in Kubernetes automatically, and a whole lot more. Security scanning, blah, blah, blah. So if you're interested in all that stuff. But other than just using a Docker build command, like I don't know what else you would do with a Docker file other than lint it or try to build it.
And and then there's the security reviews. You've talked about like the licensing and there's all these types of other things that you could be looking at through your Docker files. What are you really getting in that? If you just put in from this base image, what's really in that base image? What are you getting with that? There's a whole lot of understanding you can do to, there's not one tool.
Yeah. Well, if there is one tool, it would be Superlinter.
Superlinter, yeah.
Yeah. So like, if people haven't, which is funny because it's not one tool, it's a single tool that runs many tools.
Hmm.
Superlinter is something that I advocate a lot for teams that are not mature in their linting. If your team isn't linting every file type and every repo on every PR, then you need Superlinter because it will do that. And it only, you can set it up by default. It only scans change files. So your PRs won't scan by default every file in the repo, just the ones you changed. And you can then put in standards configuration files. So if you don't agree with theirs, or if you need to opt out of rules or add new rules, you do all that. And that's something we learn. I actually have a whole video of that on my GitHub or on this YouTube channel. Actually, if you just search GitHub Actions or Superlinter, you will find those. And that's what I would do. I mean, I would focus on the linting, which also does part of what Matt's talking about with the license scanner,
Hmm.
security scanners, Trivy, those kind of things. A lot of times are in these tools.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Moet. Oh yeah, Blazkin says they found so YouTube recommendations. Thanks, YouTube. Glad
Cool.
you're here. Yeah. So show back up every Thursday. We do the same thing here. We have guests. Sometimes we don't. And when we're not here, we're all hanging out in the DevOps server right there. So join that. You can. The reason I'm here talking is because I have a bunch of courses on Docker and Kubernetes and DevOps. So if you go below, you can find coupons on those courses. And welcome to the community. Glad to have you. Written in Haskell. Um, what's written in Haskell? Oh, the Hodoo maybe is written in Haskell.
Yeah.
um, let's say we want to integrate a testing framework that can lint, unit test, function test, etc., and give us a secure base image that can use in better way and build upon and further. So those are all separate things, and you wouldn't want all of that bundled into a single tool, I don't think. I think maybe what you're asking for is GitHub Actions or something similar to that is going to automate said testing. A lot of times unit tests are written in the language, a framework for your language, so that's very language specific. Then a secure base image would be a secure base image is a very opinionated thing. And that is
Hmm.
something that I talk about a lot on this channel. If you go back and you look up security, if you look up DevSecOps in this channel or secure supply chain, you will find other videos. If you're interested in secure base images, I would recommend going and looking at ChainGuard images. These are available on GitHub or GitHub's container registry or on Docker Hub. But if you look, we used to call them Wolfie images, but Wolfie is the basis for a lot of these images. And ChainGuard is a company at the forefront of trying to create small little images that have 0 CVEs, which is a pretty incredible achievement. And they're doing it for more and more common repositories and languages. So they are going much farther than the defaults that Docker Hub are making. So I would definitely advocate. ChainGuard was on this show last year. You can go look at ChainGuard in this channel, and you'll find a ChainGuard video from last year talking about Woofy, how Woofy works, and you can now use these images as your base images. So, for example, if you're a Python developer, if you're using from Python, you can probably swap it out with very few changes, if any, to this. So you would change out, it would say from cgr.dev/chainguard/python : version. And it would be a smaller, probably smaller, because one of the ways they're able to achieve 0 CVEs is they take out a lot of stuff that you don't need.
Right.
And then they will sometimes even patch the vulnerabilities themselves. And they include all the SBOM and provenance information so that you can be sure that this image has a proper accounting of everything that's in it, and that you know how it was built and where it came from. So I highly recommend them. In fact, they eventually, if they continue to have success with this, it'll probably land in my courses, which you can find coupons for below. Because this is something that we've all been asking for from Docker, but Docker didn't really want to get into that business. And then there's another company called, I'll show you the other side of this, Slim.ai, who we have also had on this show. And they do the opposite. They take the image that you made and they will remove stuff out of it to make it more secure and reduce the vulnerability count. So whereas ChainGuard requires you change your from image and that you use a new base and that you build on top of that new base, and it has limits. It has things that you can't necessarily do. For example, it doesn't have a shell by default. Like there's all these things in ChainGuard that can make it harder if you're not a senior Docker person. It might be challenging. Slim AI takes the approach of, hey, you don't really have to know anything about Docker. You just point us at your images, and then we will break it down statically, do a static analysis on it, look at your code, look at the dependencies, figure out what you really need, and remove the rest. So it's a little bit of voodoo, and I think we need both. I think some teams want this approach. Some teams want the ChainGuard approach. Some teams are overwhelmed by ChainGuard. Like the ChainGuard images are too much complexity. They don't even remember how their Docker file was made. It was someone who left years ago. They don't want to touch it. They just want something that will look at their image, remove vulnerable stuff, or warn them. And Slim AI does that really well. They have both an open source component as well as their SaaS. So you can essentially go on their website, point them at your image. It will rescan it and remake it with less vulnerabilities. That's a great question. We could have had a whole show on that.
But sometimes you also have to think of was the concepts of risk mitigation, risk assessment. There might be a vulnerability that maybe you do the test, you see there's 15 vulnerabilities that your image is affected by, and maybe because of what you're doing, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing it, maybe those vulnerabilities don't actually get exposed because of the footprint of your container, and maybe that vulnerability or multiple vulnerabilities, they might not be that big a deal because they don't affect how people actually use your. So I mean, just because you see a vulnerability, it's not the sky's not falling.
Yeah.
But, or maybe it is, but you have to really. Ideally, you want to go for zero, but I mean, I've definitely been in places where there are a couple, and they were after a lot of review, it was determined, okay, that's okay, we can live with that, and move on.
Yeah. I think that's a real challenge. Even with this tool, even with Slim AI, it's like knowing if I have curl in my image, and curl is always vulnerabilities in curl are like two peas in a pod, because curl has so much built in. There's a ton of advanced functionality in curl that most people don't even know about. FTP and all this other stuff in it that obscure protocols that it supports that no one ever uses. And if your app doesn't ever actually run the curl binary, then how vulnerable, how risky is it really if your app never uses it, if it's just sitting in the container? And that's a real challenge. Slim AI is trying to solve that problem. My understanding is they're going language by language, framework by framework, and implementing the static analysis so that they can do that work for you and say, hey, there's this, and you have 3 dependencies that you're not even using in your app. Why do you have them? That kind of approach.
Right.
And when we had them on the show, their approach was if it accidentally removed something that you didn't want it to remove, you could essentially put that in an allow list, or I don't know, maybe we could call it a deny list, because it denies Slim from messing with that part of the file system. So if you have a directory and you're like, these dependencies are really, I know you don't think I need them, but I really do need them, and it will prevent Slim AI from trying to take it out if it doesn't think it needs it. So they're doing some hard work there. The magic is in the automation it provides, and they also do pretty interesting reports. They did a KubeCon keynote talk. They did a talk at CIVO that you and I were at, on this, the analysis they've done of a lot of the Docker Hub images. But
Mm-hmm.
they're not. It's one of those things where they're doing really cool work, but I don't recommend them to everyone because at the end of the day, this is not fixing it at the source. This is sort of fixing it after the fact to me. But I think it absolutely has a place in the ecosystem. And I did a security talk this year where I actually said both of these tools are at the opposite ends of the spectrum of the workflow. And if we all are shifting left, if we're trying to take our security and shift left, we're probably going to end up at ChainGuard's solution, which is better base images. But a better base image doesn't make your dependency installation any better. So we maybe still need something after that, and that would be something like Slim AI. Yeah. If you didn't know about Slim AI, people, they're the ones that made Docker Slim. So if you just look up Docker Slim, they've changed it around a little bit, but Docker Slim is now Slim AI. So for the years and years, I had this free open source tool called Docker Slim. Now they've just rebranded it. It's just called Slim. And I believe that it's still open source. Yeah. But it looks at your Docker image and evaluates it for what you can remove, essentially. Hopefully that helps. Curl is fun, though. Did you know Curl speaks SSH? I'm convinced that Curl speaks every protocol on a TCP network, on IP network. And that's part of Curl's problem. By the way, if you're someone who needs to get a file, I always recommend putting in wget rather than curl, because wget is a fraction of the size. We are usually always pulling from an HTTP URL, and wget does that great, just as good, if not better than curl.
Yep.
And it does it at a fraction of the size and almost never has a vulnerability compared to curl. So a lot of teams, I will search for curl in their Docker files, and if I see it in there, I will advocate for them to swap out for a different tool. There's probably even better tools in wget now, especially if you're in certain languages like Go or whatever, where there's probably a library. It might even be, it's probably in the standard library in Go that I don't remember. But I will switch teams a lot of times over to wget. We also now, this is a little bit of a side topic, but one of the last things I'll mention is Docker has, I think it's a beta feature now. Docker add, Docker file, add. There is now a beta feature. Let's see if I can find it by doing it the last month. There's a beta feature in Docker now that adds capability to the add command to go get more things from more ways, so that you have less reasons now for wget or curl in your Docker file. Add always had the ability to go get files, but it maybe didn't. There was times where it maybe needed tar on your local container or whatever. But Docker, the build kit is adding. God, this is weird. Let me do Docker desktop change log. Let me see if I can find it in the recent release notes. Riveting content right here while I'm reading the internet. Maybe I just search for it.
A common action is they added something.
It's in here somewhere. I swear it's there. But yeah, it was a very early. It's an early feature, so I'm just not seeing it. Image store. I thought it was in the 0.1. Maybe it was in the. I thought it was in the 20. 4.20 that came out this last couple of weeks. Somebody in chat certainly knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, so they're adding that functionality. We would probably see that show up in Docker build. Let's see if building images. I can never find it. So Docker file, Docker reference. So if we go down to add, this is where I think it's a 1.5 Dockerfile. So if you didn't know, Dockerfile now has versions, everyone. It's all silently in the background, but Dockerfile 1.5 is the latest. And I thought they kept a list of all the features in Dockerfile versions. Release notes. There we go. Here we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Add command now supports checksum flag to validate the contents of the remote URL.
Okay.
Add command now supports importing files directly from Git URLs. Now I'm talking. Okay, so yeah. So adds getting new love. And so this was the one I was thinking of. It was from Git URLs. So you can pull directly from a GitHub repo into your specific files. This would not be the same as a Git clone. I don't recommend doing Git clones in Docker files. But the add command itself is getting some more love, so it's good. And by the way, if you didn't know this existed, people, Docker files are getting fancier all the time, and we don't really know it because we don't have to necessarily specify the version as long as you're using Dockerfile build kit. If you're using Docker build, that now uses BuildKit. BuildKit has all this built in. But if you're using some other builder or some other tool like Builda, or there's some like Go and Java have their own builders sometimes. Those may not have all these features because they're not following the Dockerfile spec. This is not necessarily OCI spec. So a lot of people will talk about how they want everything to be OCI spec. But the reality is the OCI spec always lags behind the Dockerfile spec. I personally am a fan of Dockerfile spec because Docker is the best at it. They're the ones that are innovating. And if it makes it into a Dockerfile release, chances are it's going to stick around. So it's not going to just be something that they throw away. They do have labs. They do have experimental features. I don't necessarily recommend, if you are going to use those features, they're usually very stable. They just may not always exist, or they may not actually leave labs and come out as stable. So I'm always a little bit apprehensive at putting those into production stuff. But I've never found really any of those to really be unstable or have a reason to not use them from a stability standpoint. It's just a question of, will it still work next month? So anyway, yeah, like 1.4, a lot of people made news last year when 1.4 came out, and we added the link option, which is pretty fantastic. The link option allows you to actually rebuild an entire Docker image by only sticking a layer in the middle and not rebuilding the whole thing. It's actually really great for when you need to throw in binaries that you maybe you compile separately and you need to inject them into your Docker file at build time, but you don't need everything done after that because you're just changing a tool. You add the -- link, and that could save you minutes or more on your Docker builds by doing that. So yeah, things keep happening to Docker files. I probably should add more and more stuff to my courses on it, but quite frankly, it's a lot. there's a lot here. So a lot of us that learned Docker files, we all learned Docker like 1.0. We learned the features and functionality from 2013, and we never really understood that there was all these versions and features coming after that. So this could probably be a course. Somebody should do that. Somebody should make that. If we knew a guy that made courses. All right, people, we've been here an hour and a half, so I think our time is up. I really appreciate it.
I got to share a tool that's not really related, but I just learned about it yesterday, and I really want to spend a little bit more time playing with it. Somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, you should check this out," because I had made a video once before on my channel about JQ and about. Do you know about JQ? JSON query. Yeah. So, but what if you wanted to grab data from a website or some sort of API and then munge that data directly rather than downloading as a JSON file? And so it's called Krull. Not K, not KRULL. That was a bad movie from whatever. But that
it was not a bad movie. I love that movie.
It was I love that blade. That throwing star with the blades that came out. Oh, it's really cool. But CRUL.
Krull. And do I need to search something else or just Krull? Krull.com.
It's Krull.com. Yeah, Krull.com. I think they should change the logo to that What was it called? The
Glaive.
blade thing? The
Glaive.
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 Okay.
Glave.
Oh
Glaive.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like a ninja throwing star,
With
but
curved blades that popped out of it. Yeah.
it was
It was
bedazzled,
awesome.
and it was a bedazzled ninja throwing star, and it had knives that popped out, and it
Yeah.
could fly on its own. It was like magic. I'm just gonna have to Google it. Yes, that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's amazing.
and that movie was awesome. I actually rewatched a couple years ago, and
Oh really? I feel like
I
I
mean,
should see it
obviously,
again.
there's a lot of it that's cheesy and bad, and but I love Cyclops. I love I mean, there's so much of it. Um, it's honestly, it's like that and Flash Gordon are the quintessential '80s sci-fi superhero movies. Like those two movies, you could stand those up um, in the '80s, and you could look at those and go, "Yep, that defines a decade of sci-fi right there." You have your
Yeah.
fantasy, your sci-fi fantasy, and your medieval fantasy, and this one is
Hmm.
the medieval fantasy. Flash Gordon was. I mean, I think I wore out that VHS tape. I watched Flash Gordon so many times. That was an amazing movie. I can't say that was so much part of my childhood. So anyway, we're getting
Anyway,
back to the point.
Krull with
Yeah,
a C.
Krull.
I mean,
Query
as you
web
scroll
page.
down here, it's got a bunch of examples. Basically, you're pulling from a website and then filtering it down based on additional commands you give it, and it looks really, really slick. So that's my fun little
Very
thing to
cool.
add.
Wow, that's pretty slick.
Yeah,
Of course, now that the APIs are all getting locked down, I don't know
yeah,
how useful tools like this.
yeah.
Some are predicting the end of the open web. Blame AI.
Mm,
I'm not sure we're going to go that far, but
right.
Anton says, "Does a link option support any kind of authentication?" I don't believe so. Yeah, because the link option that doesn't necessarily mean it's getting it from the internet. It means that when it's going to change that layer later, whatever you did in there, it's going to do it out of band. So it's not normally when we change a layer in a Docker file, if there's anything that changes in that line, that breaks the cache. So you have to rebuild everything after that. The -- link avoids that dilemma and will not rebuild the rest of it. So you have to be careful because you could get yourself in trouble. Like you obviously don't want to link a package JSON file because then it would never rebuild the packages after that. But if you're putting in files that are already that basically don't affect the rest of the Docker file, maybe you have like some static files that just need to be added to your website, but you don't need to build them or do anything after that in the Docker file, you can add the -- link and it will, when it rebuilds, it'll just it actually doesn't even need, this is what's crazy, it doesn't even need access to the other layers. It will literally make that layer and shoot it up to with a manifest file to Docker Hub or wherever without needing the rest of the layers. So it won't even download the from image or anything. So it's pretty cool. This is cool. I'm gonna have to check this out. Thanks. Great
Yeah,
tip here. I'm gonna put
yeah.
that in chat. And with that, I think we're gonna call it a day. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll be here again live next week with a guest, and
Yep.
this comes out in a podcast. You can get the links for the podcast below. You can join the Discord server over there where we all hang out afterwards, and you can get a newsletter, my courses, the blog, all that stuff in the description below. There's just all that stuff. So pick your poison, and we'll see you next week on YouTube Live. Ciao, everybody.
That was good. Bye.